Scouters are quick to point to Caleb Williams' completion percentage, but advanced quarterback charting shows just how well he's developing right on track.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lauren Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. On the show today, we're going to break down where Caleb Williams' advanced quarterback metrics put him among QBs around the NFL and paints a much more complete picture than just, oh, he had a low completion percentage this past season. We're going to dive into PFF's QB Annual, their annual quarterback guide that provides advanced metrics and data that aren't normally publicly available, but only come out specifically for these quarterbacks, specifically in this annual QB guide. And it's going to show us where Caleb Williams is coming along in some really key areas of quarterback play that paint a picture of where he is now and where he is certainly well on the way toward advancing early in his career. We'll go through some things that he's doing really well, some of the things he still has to work on, and also some of the cool things the data tells us about just how this Bears offense functions and some of the other players on offense that are benefiting from it. Like I said, all the data we're going to reference here comes from PFF's QB Annual. Full credit to them. It's available with a PFF subscription, but it's not just about their grades in there, right? This is not just a repackaging of PFF grades, but like actual objective data as far as measurable points on a field, not just people grading games, but like measuring how often he threw the deep ball, right? There's no subjectivity there. You just look at how many times the ball crossed a certain distance in the air, right? These are hard and fast numbers, and how often he faced certain coverages, and how often he was under pressure. Some of these things that are not a subjective grading process, but legitimately just real, hardline objective data, then sliced and diced into a bunch of different areas. Like one good example I want to start with here that kind of shows where Caleb Williams is at right now in his career is PFF has a wins above replacement metric. Very similar to, you might know, wins above replacement in baseball, right? In the oversimplified version, it's just like how good is a player compared to an average player at his own position. Essentially, we've got years and years and years of data of how well quarterbacks perform. They can kind of average that out and find out what an average performing quarterback looks like. And then you can see how much above that average you are, and to see how much above that average everyone is, and to see who is more above that average than other players. And Caleb Williams' wins above replacement, the number doesn't even matter. I don't even know what the number is. I don't even really know what the number means. I don't know how many wins above replacement he technically is. But I think what matters most to me is where he ranks compared to other quarterbacks. He is technically worth 2.13 wins above replacement, whatever that means. But compared to his peers in the quarterback world, he is technically 12th, but only by a fraction of a decimal. He was basically tied for 10th. And that kind of feels like where we can reasonably and accurately rank Caleb Williams among quarterbacks. Like, I'm not here to say wins above replacement is like some perfect measurement of QBs and that this is the master order that everyone should follow. But if I came to you and said, hey, Caleb is kind of around the 10th or 12th best quarterback in the NFL last season, that seems like a fairly reasonable number that we can all agree with. Like, sure, some Bears fans will argue to the death that he's a top 5, top 10 quarterback already. I'm not quite there yet, but I also like looking at how he compared to other quarterbacks. And this is specifically just how they performed last season, right? This is not a career spanning thing. It's not taking into account, their contract or their situation. I mean, I guess wins above replacement takes into account some of their situation, but like Caleb Williams was just ahead of Jalen Hurts, Brock Purdy, and Bryce Young in the wins above replacement metric last year, basically tied with Bo Nix and Justin Herbert by a fraction of a decimal in there. And the three of them were just behind Josh Allen, Jared Goff, and Joe Burrow. Like, that feels about right for where Caleb Williams is and where he should be given his developmental curve at this stage of the season. But this is just one metric, right? We're not going to put all our eggs in the wins above replacement basket. But I think him ranking 12th is like, yeah, above average, but not at the very top quarterback yet. And that's kind of right where he should be. Or the other metric a lot of people point to is EPA per play, expected points added per play, which is actually not that dissimilar from wins above replacement. It's just at a more granular level. Like they have years and years of quarterback data, and they know, okay, on average, when a quarterback does this, it usually leads to this many points. And when a quarterback does this, it leads to fewer points or whatever it might be. And then you can look over all their plays, how the things they did compared to what typically happens for quarterbacks in those situations and compare. And Caleb Williams is just above the average in EPA per play, EPA per drop back as a quarterback last season. He was a 0.06 and the average is 0.05. Like he is above average, but not running away with it or anything like that at the quarterback position right now. Both the wins above replacement and EPA. Again, like knowing the specifics of the stats is not that important. Like just where he's ranking, right, among other quarterbacks. If they're all being measured by the same tool, having him be just outside of the top 10, above average, that feels pretty right and accurate to me, and is both drastically better than he was in his first season. He ranked 24th in wins above replacement his first season, his rookie season with Matt Eberflus, of course, and then had a negative EPA per play his first season as well. So of course, like gigantic jump from year 1 to year 2, and you expect continued progress. Maybe not as gigantic of a jump, but definitely continued progress now entering year 3. I just think it really paints him perfectly into where he is as a young quarterback. And then you can kind of get into some of the areas where he really stood out his strongest here, where he leads the way or is, the cream of the crop among quarterbacks. I was really impressed with the numbers that came out when he was facing the blitz, and also his ability to make big plays when he is under pressure. And those two things definitely correlate quite a bit there. But like when Caleb Williams was blitzed last season as compared to not blitzed, his completion percentage went down a little bit against the blitz, just slightly, but like he averaged a higher yards per attempt against the blitz. He averaged a higher EPA against the blitz. He had more big time special throws against the blitz than when he was not blitzed. He had fewer turnover worthy throws against the blitz, and obviously he was even sacked at an even lower rate against the blitz, because the blitz would come, he would get out of the pocket and he would throw it away a lot or just find something to do with the ball, but was rarely just sitting there and letting the blitz actually get home, because he was really good at identifying it and responding to it. And I think that's really impressive for a young quarterback to be able to withstand that, the Brian Floreses of the world can't just intimidate him at the line of scrimmage by sending the house over and over again. He was able, especially this past season, to do a lot more against the blitz and have answers for them, maybe in part due to Ben Johnson, and maybe a large part due to Ben Johnson being able to give him better options than what he had with Matt Eberflus the year before. But nonetheless, it's definite progress there, and a real strength for Caleb Williams to hang his hat on there. We know that he is great when the play breaks down, and there's one metric in particular that I think illustrates that perfectly. It's when he's under pressure. He made an incredible amount of what PFF categorizes as big time throws. That's their way of separating like easy throws versus difficult throws. Like the difficult throws are big time throws are the difficult ones that are thrown downfield against tight coverage, deep ball. Not all deep balls. Like it can be a tight window, shorter throw, or it can be a more impressive downfield throw. And when Caleb Williams was under pressure, he had a big time throw rate of almost 10%. It's crazy. Like no quarterback in the NFL had a big time throw rate that high, like over the course of the season. Like the leader in big time throw percentage last season was Matthew Stafford at 7.7% overall. When Caleb Williams was under pressure, he was having more big time throws than any other quarterback in the NFL, even when they're not under pressure. Like that's like the level of special you're seeing from the types of throws that Caleb Williams is making. So that's the kind of stuff that I love digging into in the PFF QB annual here. There's some great stats about his crunch time performance or clutch time performance. Essentially late in games trailing, and when you need clutch plays. We saw it with our eyes, but the numbers back it up. He was 12th in passing grade in clutch time, 11th in yards per pass attempt, 6th in big time throw percentage, 7th in positively graded play percentage. He was doing well in the negatively graded play percentage and second in pressure to sack rate. Like in clutch time, he was making big plays, wasn't taking sacks, taking care of the football, not putting the ball in harm's way. Like across the board, you saw in 185 clutch dropbacks, he was filling every answer that this Bears offense needed from him. So like you can start to paint here this idea of like a quarterback who is doing the difficult things really, really well and ranking above average, sniffing the top 10 and ready to take that next step forward in 2026. And I think the QB annual identifies a few areas where, yeah, he does need to get better. Everyone acknowledges there's more that Caleb Williams needs to do, but I think it also tells us a little bit more specifically of like, not just, oh, he needs a higher completion percentage, oh, he needs to be more accurate or whatever, but like specifically things that within his game that are going well and not going well that we'll dive into next on Locked On Bears. This episode is sponsored by Betterhelp. We talk about mental health more openly now, but sometimes asking for help can still feel hard. And the latest research from BetterHelp confirms that. BetterHelp's 2026 State of the Stigma report surveyed 2,000 Americans and revealed that 85% of respondents believe getting support is wise, but 74% say society discourages people from doing so. The disconnect is so interesting because most people believe that support is a good thing, but actually taking that step can be difficult. So it's worth asking what helps makes this conversation feel more normal and more encouraged. That's where BetterHelp comes in. As the world's largest online therapy platform with over 30,000 therapists globally, helping more than 6 million people connect with support. Through a short questionnaire, they'll give you the initial match process so you can focus on your therapy goals. And if the match isn't right, you can switch to a different therapist from their tailored recommendations at any time. So don't let stigma get in the way of support. Start therapy with BetterHelp. Sign up and get 10% off at betterhelp.com/lockedon. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. Caleb Williams did so many good things this past season, but I think looking at where the mistakes came as well helps us get a bigger picture or a better picture of what he needs to work on specifically and where we can still see so much growth. And also, you can also, in looking at what he did poorly, you can also kind of see by comparison what he didn't do poorly, where the mistakes were, also kind of highlight, oh, well, then the mistakes weren't happening elsewhere. Like I think a really good example of this is one of the things that PFF tracks in the QB annual is incompletion types. So every time a quarterback throws an incomplete pass, they will designate that in a certain category. There's been a bunch of different categories of incompletion types. Sometimes you underthrow it and it's incomplete. Sometimes you overthrow it, you're incomplete. Sometimes it's a drop pass by a receiver. Sometimes it's a batted pass at the line of scrimmage. Sometimes it's a diving pass breakup by a defensive player that makes a good play. Like each incompletion gets a category. It automatically gets a category of incompletion type. And there's like, I don't know what it is, 12, 15, 20 different types of incompletion categories that any individual pass can get. But then you can look at, okay, well then where did Caleb Williams' incompletions come from? Were there patterns or themes in why his incomplete passes were incomplete that can tell us a lot about how the Bears offense was functioning, how the quarterback was functioning, and how you sort of assign blame for a lower overall completion percentage. And the QB annual reveals that the most frequent incompletion type for Caleb Williams this past season was caused by defensive players. Defensive players caused incomplete. 80 of his 293 incompletions this past season. And now, when you say that out loud, it is a little vague. I'll explain a little bit more depth what they mean by defensive cause. But right, this is something where the ball gets to the receiver, and that doesn't mean it's a perfectly accurate pass with nothing wrong with it, but it gets to the receiver, and the defense makes it as though it cannot be caught. So this can include diving pass breakup by the cornerback. This can include a cornerback ripping his arms through a receiver's hands and pulling the ball out, where it's not like a clean drop where just the receiver just dropped it and there was no defender around, but like the defender forces the drop in there. It can include when a receiver's coming over the middle of the field and the safety lowers a shoulder into him and just dislodges receiver from ball. And so it can be easy to just say, oh, well, if the majority, or I guess the largest source of Caleb Williams' incompletions were caused by the defense, that's not his fault. He was doing a good job. And it's not that black and white. Sometimes the defense causing incompletion can be a really great play by the defender. Sometimes it can be that the quarterback put the ball in a position where a defensive player had a shot at it, instead of putting the ball away from a defensive player, but puts it towards a defensive player where a more accurate pass could have been completed there, but the defender gets credit for breaking up the pass, because if there had not been a defender there, it probably still would have been caught. It doesn't mean it was a perfectly accurate throw, but probably still would have been caught in a situation like that. So that's what makes his incompletion type metric there a little bit tricky. But I think it's really worth noting that if his number one type of incompletion was defensive caused, number two falls in the other category, which means 133 of his 291 incompletions in the regular season, I don't think it includes playoffs, last year, were not simply and purely bad, inaccurate throws from Caleb Williams. Like, he had 45 overthrows. He had 27 throws that were too far in front of receiver, 14 that were too far underthrown receiver, 13 that were behind receiver. Definitely plenty of throws that were not accurate enough from Caleb Williams, but you have 43 in there that were receiver errors. You got sometimes where it's receivers, the sideline, it's a catchable ball, but just doesn't get 2 feet in bounds. There's a bunch of different reasons that can fit in that other category. But what's not anywhere in these lists of the vast majority? I mean, those 7 categories we just mentioned there make up over 95% of Caleb Williams' incomplete passes. It's not a source of incomplete passes for Caleb Williams last season? Misreading coverages. That's specifically one of the incompletion types that PFF tracks, where it's just like you thought a defender was going to be in one spot and it turns out he was in another spot. Like, that's not something that Caleb Williams had trouble with last season. I think he had 2 or 3 plays that were incomplete passes because of a slightly misread coverage, but it was just not something that was a problem for him. He's someone who reads coverages very well, has the smarts between the ear, and I think it comes back down to, like, as far as incompletions, I think it comes down to being on the same page with the offense and throwing it where the receiver is supposed to be and the receiver being there, and then also kind of sometimes just missing the easy ones with imperfect mechanics. Because one of the other ways you can look at this is how Caleb Williams performed on different reads in his passing progression. I think this is one of the most interesting things that the QB annual provides here, because like you can watch a quarterback go through their progressions and kind of see, okay, the helmet is looking to the right at his first read, for example, and then you can see him turn and look at the second read, and then maybe the third read, and then turn, and the helmet comes all the way back to the check down, and you can kind of track. And the people at PFF do this. Like, if you slow it down and take the time to do this, you can track a quarterback going through his progression and kind of where he fits in that metric. And when he was on, he ranked low on throws on his first read, which I think is super interesting. He was, 23rd out of 43 quarterbacks on his first read, which is the vast majority of his throws, were 466 of his pass attempts, I think. His overall total pass attempts came to the first read in the progression. That's fairly normal. Most quarterbacks throw their first read because the play is designed to get to the first read, and if you got a good play caller, that first read is usually going to be open. That's what you want. So Caleb was a little bit below average on the first read, but when he got to his second read, he was 6th in the NFL among quarterbacks out of 43 quarterbacks that were tracked here on his performance once he got off the first read and got to the second read. I think you can envision this in a lot of those plays where Caleb Williams would throw it over the middle of the field. It would be, there'd be DJ Moore or Roman Dunze, like somebody from the backside running an in route, like a deep dig over the middle of the field, where Caleb would start looking one way and then his eyes would come to the middle of the field and he hit that player running horizontally, like parallel with the line of scrimmage, break into the inside. Like, those were the kind of like second read throws that he made and was really good at and are really like tailor-made for this Ben Johnson offense. That, hey, you're checking the first read first, of course. That's where you want to go to the ball. But usually then you know that, hey, that next read's going to be there over the middle of the field, or something that was there a lot for the Bears in the offense. So I think it was interesting that I think when Caleb is performing poorly on his first read, those are like the quick throw mechanic type of stuff we talk about, where he just wouldn't quite set his feet properly, wouldn't quite follow through on the throw properly, would just kind of rush it, and sometimes he'd one-hop it to an open receiver on a curl route, or just put it too far in front of a receiver, makes a quick little out route towards the sideline. You're just like, why did he miss that little one here or there? I think that's reflected in those first read throws not being that great, not because he was having trouble reading his first read, because like we talked about, like his ability to read a coverage was not an issue. He does not have misread coverage as a big part of his, incompletions. But it's just I think it's the mechanics and the quickness and just sort of like really honing that in. We remember Ben Johnson had him switch which foot he's got forward. It's about trying to learn and know the play and get the ball in a hurry and know exactly where the ball is supposed to be, when it's supposed to be there on time, and him kind of trying to stay afloat while drowning in a little bit of the Bears offense. So that's an area that should be very easy to fix and should be something that we see a lot more emphasis on this upcoming season, when they have to spend less time installing scheme and more time perfecting the scheme that they have already installed. And speaking of scheme, I think the data around Caleb Williams tells us some really interesting things about the Bears offense itself, not just how the quarterback performed within it. So I want to take a look at where his passes were going, what impact his offensive line had on it, and where there's definitely a really specific untapped piece of Caleb Williams' game that Ben Johnson has really not gotten much into, and is just scratching the surface of unlocking even more from Caleb Williams. That's next on Locked On Bears. The cool thing about the quarterback position is that it's so central to the entire offense that a lot of times what he does can tell us a lot about what the play caller is calling, what routes the receivers are running, and how the offense as a whole is functioning. And I think there's some cool stuff we can piece together about Ben Johnson's offense based on Caleb Williams' data in the PFF QB annual. Like, for example, they track the types of throws the quarterback is making based on how the receivers are running relative to the quarterback, right? So are you throwing a pass that you're trying to lead the receiver vertically, putting the ball in front of him? Are you throwing a pass where you're trying to lead the receiver horizontally, throwing the ball it's sort of, sideways in front of him, right? Different types of in front of him, I guess. But, or is it like a curl route type of play where the receiver is coming back toward the quarterback? Like, that's a different angle of throw. Are you throwing a swing pass to the running back out of the backfield? All right, this is less about, what route the receiver is running, and more about like what direction the receiver is running relative to the quarterback. And that's what I want to dig into just a little bit here with Caleb, because I think it tells us a little bit about Ben Johnson's offense, more so even than just purely, what Caleb Williams was doing with his throws here. So like the types of throws that Caleb Williams was making this past season, like the majority of his pass attempts were in this category of horizontal leading the receiver horizontally. He had 345 passes leading the receiver horizontally. And like that's all those plays of guys breaking over the middle of the field that we talked about there. Leading horizontally can also be out routes as well. But so it's not to say that this is a horizontal offense in terms of like throwing behind the line of scrimmage, like horizontal as opposed to vertical. No, it's that the stems can be vertical, but then the direction the receiver is running is either horizontally towards the sideline or horizontally towards the middle of the field. Those were the most frequent throws Caleb Williams was making this year. So we can sort of try and, ascertain then that those are the throws Ben Johnson was looking for him to make, was calling plays with a lot of those horizontal breaking routes, either out towards the sideline or in towards the middle of the field. There were a lot fewer, by comparison, of those vertical leading throws, right? Where it's just, it can be a post route or a corner route or a 9 route, but like, the over the top types of throws were a lot fewer by comparison. It was about his third most accurate. Like, first most common was the horizontal throws. Second most common was like the curl route type of receiver stops and faces the QB. And then third most common was the vertical lead there, but not as much like trying to drop the ball in over the shoulder. Only threw like 3 jump balls, only like 3 back shoulder plays, only a couple of shovel passes, really not that many swing passes. And really over the course of the season, not a ton of like true bubble screen type of like wide receivers running backwards types of bubble, but it's a lot of like they want to get the ball in the hands of a receiver, usually moving horizontally so that they can then create yards after catch. That's really what Ben Johnson's trying to do there. And it's not always short routes either, but it is, hey, if the receiver is running horizontally, now he's got that momentum kind of running in a different direction than defenders are running. Like the only person to be running with him is a player in man coverage, but if you're in zone, like players aren't turning and running with them in the same direction horizontally. And so that player then when he catches the ball is a lot closer to full speed than the defender and has that initial speed separation already sort of built in after the catch there. So I think it's a cool way of sort of seeing how Ben Johnson tries to get the ball into the hands of receivers that way. They also look at how much Caleb Williams is under pressure and where that pressure came from. You know, how often was the left tackle giving up pressure? How often was the right guard giving up pressure, the tight end? And how often was the pressure the quarterback's fault because he just held on to the ball too long, or he left the pocket when it was clean and didn't need to leave the pocket and then ran into the pressure from a guy that otherwise would have been blocked if the quarterback had just stayed in the pocket. And I think the pressure source numbers reflect pretty darn closely how we view the Bears offensive linemen from last season. That like Joe Thuney was the third best left guard, or I should say over the course of the season, the left guard position in Chicago, which was almost exclusively Joe Thuney, was third best, like 40th lowest out of 43. I realize it's kind of an inverse way of thinking about it, but when the pressure number is low, that's a good thing. So you want to rank, you know, with a big number there, but you only gave up 10% or 10.3% of the pressure came from the left guard spot. There's third best number at left guard for any team. At right tackle, fourth best pressure allowed from Darnell Wright at right tackle most of the season, right? I think Theo Benedict started a game. No, Ozzie Trapillo may have started a game there. At one point, Theo might have plugged in there too, but like the right tackle position, fourth best in allowing pressure this past season. But then you see like left tackle, a bit worse. Maybe the sixth most pressure of any team's left tackle position, which of course for the Bears over the course of the season was 4 games of Braxton Jones, I think 7 starts from Theo Benedict, and then whatever's left went to Ozzie Trapillo, and then I guess, I don't know if it doesn't include playoffs, but otherwise Joe Thuney, I guess, did play left tackle for one of those games too. But obviously, left tackle position, little bit of a sore spot over there. Even center, you know, Drew Dahlman gave up a decent amount of pressure last season, was very good in the running game, and I still don't think he was a bad in pass protection, but gave up a little more than some other centers. I think part of that is because the Bears left him on an island quite a bit more than other centers were too. And then Jonah Jackson was kind of closer to average in terms of pressure allowed from the right guard position last season. That feels about right. Really good left guard, really good right tackle. Yep. Pretty average to above average right guard. Yep. Below average left tackle pass protection. Yep. That pretty much checks about everything we thought from about the offensive line. And it's nice when the data, not even grades, just like pressure is just did he give up pressure or not? Like, it's not a grade, it's a yes/no binary. Like, but when the eye test matches the data, I think that's a nice sort of reaffirming of how we see this team. But one thing that I don't want to say didn't match the eye test, but one thing that stood out from this QB annual data that surprised me, like most of the stuff we're talking about, like, yeah, kind of in line with what we might have thought, you know, the strengths and the weaknesses kind of where they were. But one thing that did surprise me actually was at the very bottom, or no, I guess it's towards the bottom of the quarterback annual here. There is data on the quarterback rushing ability and how productive quarterbacks were as runners. Obviously, not as important as how productive they are as throwers. That's why I saved it towards the end of the episode here, because some of this other stuff was more important. But something that stood out to me that I hadn't fully noticed or considered that maybe we need to do a deeper dive on in a future episode is that Caleb Williams finished 5th among QBs in rushing yards last season. That part not a surprise. We knew Caleb Williams made some really nice scrambles, makes plays with his legs. He's a mobile quarterback. No surprise that he was one of the leaders in rushing yards last season. But despite being fifth in to overall quarterback rushing yards, he is a lot lower, not even top 10 in rushing yards on designed running plays for the quarterback. The vast majority of Caleb Williams' rushing yards last season came on scrambles, which is not something that's like shocking, but I guess I didn't realize how few came on designed runs. He had 417 yards on scrambles, 31 yards on 37 designed runs. So that's like QB sneaks, option plays where the quarterback keeps the ball and doesn't hand it off, or like a naked bootleg where he's never going to throw. Like it's not a pass, it's just a run, but like a play where the quarterback is the ball carrier and is not designed to throw on that play. He did it 37 times and only had 31 yards. A lot of those were QB sneaks. The point being is like, when I sat back and thought about it, we didn't really see much of an option running game from the Chicago Bears last season. Or we did see option plays, but very rarely did Caleb Williams ever keep it on an option play. And I can't help but wonder if there's more there that Ben Johnson could tap into. That obviously, when you call it an option play, you're sort of giving the defense the option to guard one or the other, and sometimes you're just taking what the defense gives you. If the defense is waiting for the QB, you hand it off. And that's what happened the majority of the time last season for Caleb Williams. But I think there's more there. I think there's more designed runs for Caleb Williams where you can still keep him safe. He can slide, but like we saw even with Justin Fields in this, not in this offense, but on this team, and Mitch Trubisky before that, like you can manufacture a running game for a QB without taking away from his ability as a thrower. But he was 14th in rushing yards on designed runs, and he was 5th in rushing yards on scramble plays. It just feels like there's more they could get out of Caleb Williams' legs as a part of the designed running game if they need to. If the regular running game is working fine and the passing game is working fine, then there's no need to add in more option plays and design runs. But it just feels like something that they have the potential to do more of and could do some real damage with if they need more options to do more damage with Caleb Williams. I'm really excited to see if Ben Johnson puts any of those wrinkles in the offense and how Caleb does in these types of metrics over the course of this upcoming season. You can be sure we'll keep close tabs on it right here on the Locked On Bears podcast. So make sure you hit the subscribe button on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts, because that's going to be the best way to keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. We're not quite 5 days a week this time of year, but we'll start ramping up to 5 days a week starting next week as we get you ready for Bears training camp. So come on back tomorrow. Make Locked On Bears your first listen once again for another opportunity to bear down.